When helping turns into a boundary battle, the shift is rarely loud or obvious at first. It often begins with something small, an offer made out of care, a favor given without hesitation, a quiet step in to support someone who seems overwhelmed. The intention is simple: to lighten a burden, to show love through action, to be present in a moment where presence matters. But somewhere along the way, the meaning of that help changes. What was once seen as kindness slowly becomes interpreted as intrusion, and the line between support and overstepping begins to blur in the eyes of the people involved. At the heart of this conflict is perception. The person offering help usually acts from empathy. They see a need and respond in the most natural way they know how. To them, stepping forward feels responsible, even necessary. They may not be seeking recognition or control, only hoping to make things easier for someone they care about. Yet for the person receiving that help, especially if they are struggling with loss, illness, stress, or a change in their role, the same gesture can feel like a spotlight on what they can no longer manage alone. Instead of relief, they may feel replaced. Instead of gratitude, they may feel exposed. This emotional undercurrent is rarely spoken out loud in the beginning. Pride, guilt, and fear of judgment often silence honest conversations. The helper assumes everything is fine because no objection is voiced. The other person swallows their discomfort, convincing themselves they should be thankful, even as resentment quietly builds. Over time, small moments begin to carry heavier meaning. A child reaching for the helper instead of the parent. A decision made quickly to solve a problem. A routine that starts to feel permanent rather than temporary. Each instance adds another layer to the unspoken tension. Eventually, the conflict surfaces, but by then it is no longer about a single action. It becomes about identity, control, and belonging. The person who feels displaced may believe their role is being taken from them piece by piece. The helper, confused and hurt, struggles to understand how their efforts turned into accusations. Both feel misunderstood, both feel protective, and both are often too emotionally charged to slow down and examine what is truly happening underneath the anger. When helping becomes a boundary battle, communication often breaks down at the exact moment it is needed most. Words come out sharp instead of vulnerable. Explanations sound like excuses. Defensiveness replaces curiosity. Instead of asking, "How are you feeling about this?" people argue over who is right. The original purpose, supporting someone in need, gets lost in the struggle to defend personal roles and emotional territory. What makes this situation especially painful is that love usually exists on both sides. The helper cares deeply. The other person also cares, but feels threatened, ashamed, or afraid of being seen as inadequate. These emotions are heavy and difficult to admit, so they come out sideways as anger or blame. Without space for honesty and reassurance, the relationship shifts from cooperation to competition, even though neither person truly wanted that outcome. In the end, a boundary battle born from helping is a reminder that support is not only about action, but also about emotional safety. People need to feel included, respected, and secure in their place, especially during vulnerable seasons of life. When those needs go unspoken, even the kindest help can feel like a quiet invasion, and relationships that once felt steady can begin to fracture under the weight of misunderstood care. A child caught between love and loyalty lives in an emotional space that feels far too heavy for their small shoulders. They care deeply for the people around them, often more than adults realize. And when tension grows between those people, the child feels it like a storm rolling in long before the first thunderclap. They may not understand every detail of the conflict, but they understand tone, distance, silence, and the way a room changes when certain names are mentioned. Love pulls them in one direction, loyalty in another, and they are left trying to balance feelings they do not yet have the words to explain. In these situations, a child often becomes a quiet observer, constantly scanning the emotional environment for signs of what is safe to say and what must be hidden. They quickly learn that one person's comfort might mean another person's hurt. A simple sentence like, "I had fun today," can suddenly feel dangerous if the fun involved someone the other adult feels threatened by. So the child edits themselves. They shrink their stories. They soften their excitement. They carry joy and guilt in the same breath, unsure why something good feels like a betrayal. What makes this especially painful is that the child's love is genuine for everyone involved. They are not choosing favorites in the way adults might assume. Their heart is wide enough to hold multiple attachments at once. They can feel safe with one person and still long for the approval of another. But when adults frame relationships as sides to be chosen, the child begins to believe that loving one person fully means hurting someone else. That belief plants the seeds of anxiety and self-doubt that can follow them far beyond childhood. A child in this position often becomes hyper-aware of emotional shifts. They notice tight smiles, forced laughter, and the way conversations stop when they walk into a room, even if no one directly asks them to pick a side. They feel the pressure in subtle ways. A pause before answering a question. A careful look that seems to ask, "What did you do today? And with whom?" Over time, the child may start shaping their behavior to protect the most fragile adult in the situation, even if it means ignoring their own needs or desires. This emotional juggling act can be exhausting. Children are not meant to carry the responsibility of managing adult feelings. Yet many try. They may comfort a parent who feels left out, while also clinging to the adult who makes them feel understood. They may lie by omission, not out of deceit, but out of fear that the truth will cause more pain. Each small compromise chips away at their sense of security. Because they learn that honesty can have emotional consequences they are not equipped to handle. Inside, the child often feels confused and alone. They might wonder if they are the cause of the conflict, especially if arguments happen after their name comes up. Children naturally center themselves in the stories around them, so they may quietly carry guilt for problems that began long before they had any control. Without reassurance, they can start believing that their needs are burdensome, that asking for support creates trouble, and that love always comes with strings attached. Being caught between love and loyalty teaches a child to divide their heart instead of trusting it. They learn to measure their words, to anticipate reactions, and to protect others at the expense of their own emotional freedom. What they need most in these moments is permission to love openly, without feeling like that love must be rationed or hidden. They need to know that adult conflicts are not their responsibility, and that caring for more than one person is not a betrayal, but a beautiful and natural part of being human. Misunderstandings rarely begin with dramatic confrontations or clear declarations. More often, they start in the quiet gaps between what is said and what is heard. A message is read with the wrong tone. A decision is made based on an assumption. A silence is interpreted as agreement, or worse, as indifference. At first, these small misalignments seem manageable, like knots that can be untangled with a simple conversation. But when emotions are already strained, those knots tighten instead of loosening, and private confusion slowly transforms into something far more damaging. In emotionally charged situations, people tend to fill in missing information with their fears rather than with trust. If someone already feels insecure, left out, or threatened, they are more likely to interpret neutral actions as deliberate slights. A delayed reply becomes avoidance. An attempt to help becomes interference. A moment of independent decision-making becomes a sign of control or replacement. These interpretations feel real to the person experiencing them, even if they are far from the original intention. Without open clarification, feelings harden into beliefs. Once beliefs take root, they begin to shape the story a person tells themselves. Instead of seeing a series of isolated events, they see a pattern. Every new interaction becomes evidence that supports their growing narrative. They replay past moments, now colored by suspicion, and reinterpret them through this new emotional lens. What might have once felt like support now feels like a slow takeover. What was once appreciated now feels strategic. By the time this internal story feels complete, it carries the weight of certainty, even if it was built on misunderstandings from the start. The turning point comes when private assumptions are no longer contained. Hurt seeks validation, and validation often comes from an audience. Instead of addressing concerns directly with the person involved, someone may turn outward, sharing their version of events with friends, relatives, or the public. In doing so, they are not always trying to cause harm. Sometimes they are simply trying to feel heard, supported, and justified in their pain. But once a one-sided story is released into a wider circle, it takes on a life of its own. Public spaces amplify emotion, but rarely hold space for nuance. Listeners react quickly, often based on personal experiences rather than full context. They offer sympathy, outrage, and strong opinions, reinforcing the storyteller's perspective. Each comment of support makes the narrative feel more legitimate and more fixed. Meanwhile, the person being described is not present to clarify details or share their side. By the time they become aware of what is being said, the story has already spread, and impressions have already formed. This shift from private misunderstanding to public accusation changes the nature of the conflict entirely. It is no longer just about resolving hurt between two people. It becomes about reputation, loyalty, and social perception. The accused person may feel blindsided and exposed, forced to defend themselves against a version of events that barely resembles their reality. Attempts to explain can look like excuses. Silence can look like guilt. Either way, the situation feels unfair and overwhelming. What makes this transformation especially tragic is that it often begins with emotions that could have been addressed through honest, vulnerable conversation. A simple admission of fear, jealousy, or sadness might have opened the door to reassurance and compromise. Instead, unspoken feelings grow in the dark, where they distort intentions and magnify insecurities. By the time accusations go public, the original misunderstanding is buried under layers of pride, defensiveness, and outside influence. When misunderstandings become public accusations, trust erodes quickly and deeply. Repairing the damage requires more than clarifying facts. It requires rebuilding a sense of safety that has been shaken by exposure and judgment. And even then, some relationships never fully return to what they were, because the memory of being misrepresented in front of others leaves a mark that is difficult to forget. The breaking point in a family conflict rarely arrives without warning, but it often feels sudden all the same. For weeks, months, or even years, tension may simmer beneath polite conversations and carefully managed interactions. People adjust their tone, avoid certain topics, and convince themselves that keeping the peace is the same as solving the problem. But unspoken hurt has a way of building pressure, and when it finally surfaces, it does so with a force that surprises everyone involved. When family conflict spills into the open, it usually happens in a moment where emotions outrun restraint. A sharp comment replaces a polite smile. A long-held grievance slips out in the middle of what was supposed to be an ordinary conversation. Sometimes it happens in a private room, but often it unfolds in front of others. At a gathering, a school event, a hospital hallway, or even online, the presence of an audience changes everything. What might have been a tense but manageable exchange becomes a public rupture that can no longer be quietly folded away. In these moments, people are no longer just reacting to the issue at hand. They are reacting to every unresolved feeling that came before it. Old disappointments, perceived favoritism, past misunderstandings, and buried resentment all rush to the surface at once. Words come out heavier than intended, sharpened by history. Accusations are framed as truths. Defenses are raised before understanding has a chance to enter the room. Each person feels pushed to protect their dignity, their role, and their version of events. When conflict becomes visible to others, shame often enters the picture. Family matters are usually considered private, something to be handled behind closed doors. Once outsiders witness the fracture, people may feel exposed and judged. That embarrassment can make them double down instead of soften. Apologies feel riskier. Vulnerability feels unsafe. Rather than admitting hurt, individuals may cling more tightly to anger because it feels like strength in a moment of emotional nakedness. The breaking point also shifts how family members see each other. Roles that once felt stable suddenly seem uncertain. A sibling becomes an adversary. A parent becomes someone whose actions are being questioned rather than trusted. Even relatives who are not directly involved may feel forced to take sides, whether they want to or not. Neutrality becomes difficult when stories are shared from different angles, each one asking for loyalty and validation. For children and more sensitive family members, this public unraveling can be especially destabilizing. They may not fully understand the details, but they feel the emotional shockwave. Raised voices, tense body language, and the sudden coldness between people they love create a sense of insecurity that lingers long after the argument ends. What was once a place of belonging now feels unpredictable, and that shift can leave a lasting mark. After conflict spills into the open, returning to normal is rarely simple. Even if communication resumes, there is an awareness that something fragile has been broken. People replay the moment in their minds, remembering who said what and who was present to hear it. Trust becomes harder to extend because the memory of how quickly things escalated remains fresh. Future interactions may feel cautious, as if everyone is walking around a crack in the floor, hoping not to step on it again. Yet, a breaking point, painful as it is, also reveals truths that avoidance kept hidden. It shows where communication failed, where needs went unheard, and where emotional wounds were left untreated. While the exposure can be humiliating and the damage real, it also marks the moment when pretending is no longer possible. What happens next depends on whether those involved choose to rebuild with honesty and accountability, or retreat further into distance and defensiveness. Either way, the conflict has changed shape, and the family must now face what has been brought into the light. Choosing distance to protect your peace is one of the most difficult decisions a person can make, especially when it involves someone they love. It goes against the instinct to fix, to stay, to keep trying no matter how exhausted the heart becomes. Walking away is often misunderstood as coldness or indifference, but in reality, it is sometimes the only way to stop emotional wounds from reopening again and again. Distance is not always about giving up on someone. Sometimes it is about finally refusing to give up on yourself. When conflict becomes a constant presence, it begins to change a person from the inside. The mind stays busy replaying conversations, preparing defenses, and anticipating the next misunderstanding. The body carries tension like a second skin, never fully relaxing because another emotional storm could arrive at any moment. Over time, this state of alertness drains energy that should be spent on living, loving, and simply being. Peace starts to feel like a memory rather than a reality. In that space, distance becomes less of a choice and more of a necessity for survival. Creating distance does not erase care. In fact, it often hurts precisely because love still exists. There are memories attached, shared history, and moments of genuine connection that make the separation feel unnatural. A person may question themselves repeatedly, wondering if they are being selfish or overreacting. But protecting your peace means recognizing patterns that conversations alone have not changed. It means accepting that good intentions are not always enough to repair dynamics that continue to cause harm. Distance can take many forms. It might mean fewer phone calls, shorter visits, or setting firm limits on what topics are open for discussion. Sometimes it requires stepping away completely, at least for a while, to allow emotions to settle and perspective to return. These boundaries are not walls built out of spite. They are guardrails built out of self-respect. They create space where healing can begin, where a person can hear their own thoughts again without the noise of constant conflict. One of the hardest parts of choosing distance is facing the reactions of others. People who do not see the full picture may judge the decision, urging reconciliation without understanding the toll that staying has taken. There may be guilt, pressure, and the fear of being seen as the one who broke the family apart. But peace is deeply personal. Outsiders do not live inside the anxiety, the sleepless nights, or the emotional exhaustion that led to the boundary. Protecting your well-being sometimes means tolerating misunderstanding from those who have not walked your path. With time, Distance often brings clarity, without the immediate intensity of conflict. Emotions that once felt tangled begin to sort themselves out. A person may realize how much they had been minimizing their own hurt just to keep others comfortable. They may rediscover parts of themselves that had been overshadowed by constant stress. Daily life can start to feel lighter, more predictable, and more aligned with who they truly are rather than who they had to be to survive the tension. Choosing distance to protect your peace is not about punishing someone else. It is about honoring your own limits. It acknowledges that love does not require enduring endless emotional strain, and that relationships should not come at the cost of mental and emotional health. Sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do for everyone involved is to step back before resentment turns into something even more damaging. In that space, even if reconciliation never comes, there is room to breathe again, to heal quietly, and to build a life where peace is no longer a rare visitor, but a steady presence.